A waitress was fired for helping a disabled Marine, but minutes later, the cafe filled with uniforms, and what happened next left everyone speechless. "You're fired." Those two words cut sharper than any blade. And for Alyssa Trenholm, standing with a chipped coffee mug still warm in her hand, the moment would etch itself into memory forever. But before we get to that instant, let's pull the curtain back just a little. Because everything leading to it started like any other day inside the Granby Street Cafe in Norfolk, Virginia. The cafe wasn't fancy. A worn-out linoleum floor, the smell of bacon grease that clung to the air, the clatter of forks against thick ceramic plates. Alyssa had worked there for 6 years. She was the type of waitress regulars depended on. Quick smile, quicker refills, the kind of person who remembered not just your order, but the way you liked your toast. For Alyssa, the cafe wasn't glamorous, but it kept her bills paid and her head above water. And more than anything, it gave her a rhythm she could rely on. This morning was no different, or at least it wasn't supposed to be. The breakfast rush had already slowed, leaving just a handful of customers scattered across booths and tables. A young couple arguing quietly over their phones. An older woman slowly tearing packets of sugar. A group of construction workers laughing at a joke only they understood. And then, through the glass door with its squeaky hinge, he walked in. He was tall, but walked with uneven steps, leaning heavily on a cane. In his other hand, he gripped a tray with a plate of scrambled eggs that shook slightly as he tried to balance it. A scar peeked out from the side of his collar. His left pant leg hung neatly folded, pinned just above the knee where the limb ended. That was Sergeant Calvin Rourke, a Marine who had seen battles most people only read about in headlines before moving on with their day. He wasn't wearing a uniform now, just jeans and a weathered jacket. But everything about him carried that Marine presence. Strong shoulders, determined gaze, and a silence that felt heavy, as though it had been earned. Alyssa saw him struggling and reacted without thinking. "Sir, let me help you with that," she said, quickly stepping out from behind the counter. Calvin looked up, surprised at first. "I've got it," he muttered, but the tray tilted dangerously. "Please let me," she insisted gently, sliding the tray from his hands before he dropped it. She steadied his coffee, grabbed his silverware, and walked beside him as he made his way to an empty booth. Customers nearby glanced up, some smiling faintly at the small kindness. Alyssa carried his tray as though it was the most natural thing in the world. "Thank you," Calvin said, settling into the booth with a relieved sigh. "Not a problem," Alyssa replied with a warm smile. "You want me to grab you some extra napkins? Maybe a fresh cup of coffee?" He nodded once. That'd be great. To Alyssa, it was a fleeting act of service. The kind of thing her mother had always taught her to do. If you see someone in need, you help. It wasn't a big deal. But just across the room, standing behind the counter with his arms crossed, Martin Kedge thought differently. Martin had been managing the cafe for 3 years, and he treated it less like a place for community and more like his personal kingdom. He was known for snapping at staff if their shirts weren't tucked, or if orders took more than a few minutes. But more than anything, Martin hated when his employees strayed from what he thought mattered, keeping the paying tables turning. From his view, Alyssa helping Calvin was wasted time. He saw a waitress ignoring customers with open checkbooks to assist a man who, in Martin's eyes, wasn't worth the effort. His jaw clenched. His hand tapped impatiently against the counter. Alyssa didn't notice that. She was too busy pouring a fresh cup of coffee, setting it gently in front of Calvin, and chatting with him for a moment about how the weather had been shifting colder that week. She even slid an extra plate of toast from the warmer onto his tray, something she'd learned over the years veterans often appreciated. An extra bite to stretch the meal. To Calvin, that small gesture meant more than she could know. To Martin, it was the last straw. But before Martin exploded, before words were hurled across the cafe like daggers, before Alyssa's world was turned upside down, there was only that moment. A woman doing the right thing, a veteran grateful for the help. A cafe filled with people who would soon realize they were about to witness something none of them would forget. But trouble was already brewing, and the storm was only seconds away. The door creaked shut behind Calvin Rourke, and for a brief moment the cafe felt suspended in time. People still chatted, plates still clinked, but the quiet struggle of one man crossing the floor caught every eye that happened to glance his way. He moved with effort, deliberate, steady, but heavy, like each step demanded more from him than it should. His cane tapped the linoleum, his tray trembled in his hand. Alyssa had seen hundreds of faces walk through that same door, but this one stopped her. Something in the way he straightened his back, refusing to let the wobble show more than it had to, told her he wasn't the kind of man who ever asked for help, which made his quiet struggle all the more striking. She approached quickly, speaking in that calm tone servers develop after years on the job. "Can I carry that for you?" Calvin shook his head, managing half a smile. "I've handled worse loads." The tray tilted again, coffee sloshing over the rim. Alyssa didn't hesitate. She slipped it from his grip before disaster struck, steadying the mug and sliding the plate back into place. "Yeah, well," she said lightly. "Let's not make scrambled eggs part of the decor today." That earned the faintest chuckle from him. As they walked together toward the booth by the window, Alyssa kept the pace slow, letting Calvin use his cane without feeling rushed. Customers at nearby tables pretended not to stare, though several couldn't help following them with their eyes. There was something dignified about him, like the cafe suddenly had a weightier air with his presence. When he sat down, adjusting his leg carefully against the booth seat, he gave a quiet sigh. Not exhaustion, more like relief. "Thanks," he said, meeting Alyssa's eyes now. His voice carried the gravelly tone of someone who had spoken commands too many times in harsh places. Not everyone would have bothered. Alyssa brushed the comment off with a shake of her head. Anyone would have done the same. Calvin tilted his head, studying her for a moment. No, not anyone. Something in the way he said it told her he had seen enough of life to know better. She poured him a fresh coffee without asking. "Milk or sugar?" "Black, always black." The two exchanged a small smile. For Alyssa, it was just another moment of service. For Calvin, it was a reminder that kindness hadn't gone extinct. A few booths over, though, Martin Kedge's glare was burning a hole through her back. He had been watching from the counter, arms crossed, lips pressed thin. Alyssa knew that look. Everyone who worked under him did. But for now, she ignored it. Instead, she stayed for another minute, just long enough for Calvin to relax. "So, you're from around here?" she asked, casually wiping the edge of the table. Calvin nodded once. "Born in Hampton. Spent most of my life everywhere else." "Military?" she asked, though she already guessed. "Marine Corps." He tapped his cane gently against the floor. "Iraq. Lost this leg in Fallujah." Alyssa didn't flinch, didn't gasp. She just nodded respectfully. "Well, thank you for your service." Calvin gave a small shrug. "Most days I just feel like another guy trying to get his breakfast without making a mess." That earned a laugh out of her. Quick, genuine, enough to ease the heaviness of his words. But not everyone in the cafe found the moment heartwarming. Martin finally left his post behind the counter, striding toward Alyssa with sharp steps that cut through the space like broken glass. His shoes squeaked against the linoleum, drawing a few heads in his direction. Alyssa caught sight of him from the corner of her eye, but she stayed focused on Calvin. "I'll be right back with those napkins." "Appreciate it," Calvin replied, already sensing the tension building around them. As Alyssa stepped toward the service station, Martin intercepted her halfway. His voice was low but full of venom. "What do you think you're doing?" She blinked, caught off guard. "Helping a customer." "He's not a paying customer," Martin snapped. "He walked in with food he didn't buy here. You've got 3 tables waiting for refills, and you're playing babysitter?" Alyssa's jaw tightened. But she kept her tone even. "He needed help. It took me 30 seconds. 30 seconds is money lost," Martin hissed, his face growing redder with every word. Behind them, Calvin shifted in the booth, listening. His hand gripped the cane tightly, knuckles pale. "I'll handle my tables," Alyssa said firmly. "But I won't ignore someone who needs a hand." Martin leaned closer, his voice dropping to a harsh whisper only she could hear. "You think you know how to run this place better than me? You're one mistake away from walking out that door for good." The warning hung into the air like smoke. Alyssa stood frozen for a moment, heart pounding. But then she caught Calvin's eyes across the room. He wasn't glaring, wasn't frowning. He was just watching, quietly, as though measuring whether she'd stand tall or crumble under the weight of her manager's anger. But Martin wasn't finished yet, and the next words out of his mouth would shatter the cafe's fragile calm. Martin Kedge didn't just dislike what he saw, he despised it. The sight of Alyssa taking even a moment from her routine to help someone who, in his mind, wasn't spending a dime inside his cafe made his blood boil. And once Martin decided something was a problem, he made sure everyone in the room knew it. He crossed the floor with fast, angry strides, his shoes squeaking louder than they needed to. Customers turned their heads, sensing the tension before a word was even spoken. By the time he reached Alyssa, his face was already flushed red. "What in the world do you think you're doing?" Martin barked, loud enough for the construction workers at the corner booth to stop mid-laugh. Alyssa blinked, steadying her voice. "I was just helping him." "He's not buying anything from us," Martin snapped, cutting her off. He pointed toward Calvin, who sat in the booth with his tray and cane, his jaw tightening as the conversation grew louder. "That man brought food in here from outside. You don't waste your time running around like his personal nurse." The room fell quiet. Conversations that had filled the cafe moments earlier dissolved into silence. Even the hiss of bacon on the griddle behind the counter seemed muted. All eyes were on Martin, Alyssa, and the veteran sitting just feet away. Alyssa swallowed hard but stood her ground. "He needed help. I carried his tray, that's all." "That's not your job," Martin snapped, his words sharp as broken glass. "Your job is to serve paying customers, our customers, not charity cases who wander in here for free refills." Calvin shifted, his cane tapping against the floor, his voice carried low but steady. "I didn't ask her to help. She offered." Martin turned to him, sneering. "And you should have declined. This is a business, not a community center." A murmur rippled through the cafe. An older woman at the counter gasped softly. One of the construction workers muttered something under his breath that sounded a lot like, "That's cold!" Alyssa's hands trembled, but she clenched them into fists at her sides. "With all due respect, Martin, if you think 30 seconds of kindness costs you that much money, maybe you're in the wrong business." That did it. His face darkened to a deeper shade of red, and his voice rose to a near shout. "That's it, Alyssa. You're done here. Grab your things. You're fired." The word hung in the air, heavy and final. Alyssa froze, the coffee mug she still held slipping slightly in her grip. "Fired? Just like that? Over this?" Her chest tightened as reality sank in. She glanced around the cafe, hoping maybe someone would intervene, but the room was silent except for the sound of her own shaky breath. Calvin stood slowly, leaning hard on his cane, his voice carrying the authority of a man used to commanding attention. "Are you serious right now?" Martin turned back toward him, jabbing a finger in Alyssa's direction. "She works for me. Or she used to. This doesn't concern you." Calvin's eyes narrowed. "It concerns me if someone's punished for doing the right thing." A woman at a nearby table pulled out her phone, her thumb sliding across the screen. Another customer followed, raising his own camera slightly, recording. Martin noticed but ignored it, too focused on Alyssa to see how quickly the room was shifting against him. "You're not the hero here, Alyssa," Martin spat. "You're an employee who couldn't follow simple priorities, and I don't tolerate insubordination." Her face burned with humiliation, but she managed to steady her voice. "I won't apologize for helping someone. If that means I lose my job, then fine." A beat of silence. Then Calvin's voice cut through like steel. "You just made the biggest mistake of your life." Martin laughed, though it came out harsh, forced. "Please, She'll be begging for work by the end of the week. And you? Don't think standing there looking tough is going to change my mind. The cafe felt different now, charged, as though the air itself had thickened. Customers whispered, some shaking their heads, others glaring openly at Martin. And in the middle of it all, Alyssa stood like a woman stripped of her dignity in front of strangers. She set the coffee mug down on the counter with a quiet clink. "I'll get my things." Her voice cracked, but she didn't let the tears fall. Not yet. Calvin watched her, his expression unreadable. His hand tightened around his phone in his jacket pocket. Without another word, he pulled it out and typed a short message, his thumb moving with precision. He didn't raise his voice or make a scene. He just sent it. One simple text that would change everything. But before the message reached its destination, the cafe was already shifting into something far larger than Martin Kedge could have imagined. The silence after Martin's outburst was louder than the noise that came before it. Alyssa stood there, coffee mug abandoned on the counter, her apron hanging loosely from her waist, as if the strings were suddenly too heavy. She didn't move right away. She couldn't. Customers shifted in their seats, uncomfortable. Some kept their eyes down, pretending to focus on their food. Others stared openly, the scene too raw to look away from. A few phones were raised higher now, recording not just the shouting, but the aftermath. Alyssa's face pale and trembling. Calvin steadying himself on his cane. Martin pacing like a man convinced he'd won. "Go on!" Martin barked again, snapping her out of her frozen state. "Get your stuff. You're done here." Alyssa's throat tightened. She wanted to shout, to tell him how unfair this was, but years of holding her tongue around this man had trained her into silence. She simply untied her apron, folded it carefully, and set it on the counter. Calvin's voice broke through the tension, calm but sharp enough to slice the room in half. "You think firing her makes you look strong?" Martin turned, sneering. "I don't care how I look. I care about my business." "Your business?" Calvin leaned heavier on his cane, his jaw clenched. "Your business just told everyone here it values profit over humanity." A murmur spread across the cafe. A man in a baseball cap near the window whispered to his wife. "He's right." The older woman at the counter dabbed her eyes with a napkin. The construction workers, who had been joking minutes earlier, now sat stiff, glaring at Martin. One of them muttered loud enough for the room to hear, "Guy's out of line." Martin ignored it. He gestured to Alyssa again, dismissive. "She can cry all she wants, but this place will run smoother without her. Employees are replaceable." That last word, replaceable, stung more than anything. Alyssa felt it land like a slap across the face. Replaceable. As if her years of showing up, double shifts, remembering customers' names, none of it meant anything. Calvin's voice rose a notch. "You don't talk about people like they're disposable." Martin squared his shoulders. "Stay out of this. You're not even supposed to be here." The cafe's air grew tighter, heavier. More phones lifted, more whispers circulated. Alyssa glanced around, realizing the moment wasn't just about her anymore. People were paying attention. People were recording. And Martin didn't seem to care. She bent down, grabbing her purse from under the counter. Her hands shook, but she kept her chin high. She refused to let him see her break. "Come on," Calvin said quietly, steadying himself as he stood. "You don't need this place." Alyssa blinked at him, caught between gratitude and despair. "I don't even know where to go right now." "You'll figure it out," he said firmly. "People like you always do." Martin rolled his eyes, muttering under his breath, "Oh, please." That did it. Calvin slipped his phone from his jacket pocket again, and this time everyone saw him type. His movements were deliberate, almost surgical. He hit send, slid the phone back into his pocket, and fixed his gaze on Martin. "Someone's coming," he said flatly. Martin snorted. "What, you gonna call your mummy? Or maybe some lawyer? Good luck. No one cares about a waitress getting fired." But his words didn't have the same punch anymore. Customers were glaring at him now, their loyalty shifting away from the man behind the counter to the woman being humiliated in front of them. A young guy with headphones around his neck muttered to no one in particular. "This is going viral. Watch." Martin turned on him, barking, "Put your phone away or get out!" The young man grinned, unfazed. "Oh, don't worry. I'm already live." Martin froze. His mouth opened, then shut, as the weight of those words sank in. Live. Not just recorded, but broadcasted. In real time, Alyssa clutched her purse tighter, her stomach twisting. She hadn't asked for this. She hadn't wanted to be at the center of a scene. All she did was carry a tray for a man who needed help. And now the whole cafe was watching her life collapse in real time. Calvin reached across the counter for his coffee, steady despite the tension. He took a slow sip, his eyes never leaving Martin. "You'll regret this," he said, voice steady as stone. Martin scoffed, though his voice cracked slightly now. "We'll see." But Martin had no idea that the message Calvin sent had already set something in motion. Something that would walk through the cafe doors sooner than anyone expected. Alyssa walked toward the back hallway, her purse pressed tight against her side. But she stopped just short of the door leading to the tiny employee locker room. Her whole body felt like it was buzzing with shame, anger, and confusion all tangled together. She had been humiliated in front of a room full of strangers for doing something she thought was simply right. She turned back once more. Calvin was still at his booth, his cane resting against the table. He didn't look rattled. If anything, he looked measured, like a man waiting for a storm he already knew was coming. Alyssa hesitated, then walked back toward him. I'm sorry," she whispered. Calvin raised his eyebrows. "For what?" "For dragging you into this. If I hadn't helped, Martin wouldn't—" Calvin cut her off with a sharp wave of his hand. "Don't you dare apologize. You did what was decent. If this world had more people like you, I wouldn't be sitting here thinking about how much it's changed since I came back home." Alyssa swallowed, blinking back tears. "But now I don't even have a job. Rent's due next week, and I don't know what I'm going to do." Calvin leaned forward, his voice lowering so only she could hear. "Jobs come and go. But character? That's what stays. And you showed yours today." She wanted to believe him, but the knot in her stomach wouldn't loosen. She had bills. She had responsibilities. And Martin's smug grin at the counter was a reminder of how small and replaceable he made her feel. Then she noticed Calvin's phone screen glowing faintly on the table. A single text thread was open. At the top of the screen was a name. Ramos. "Who's that?" Alyssa asked quietly. "An old friend," Calvin replied. "Still active duty. Stationed close by at Camp Allen." He slid the phone into his jacket pocket again, as calm as if he'd just ordered another cup of coffee. "He's coming." Alyssa's eyes widened. "You didn't—" "I did," Calvin said firmly. "And before you panic, I didn't tell him to cause a scene. I just let him know what went down. Marines look out for their own, and for the people who stand with them." For the first time since the shouting began, Alyssa felt something stir inside her. Hope, maybe, though it mixed with nervousness. "You think he'll really come?" Calvin looked at her with absolute certainty. "He'll come? Marines don't leave texts unanswered, not when it's about respect." Back at the counter, Martin barked at a young barista to wipe down tables faster, pretending like nothing had just exploded minutes earlier. But every now and then, his eyes darted to the phone still raised around the cafe. His chest puffed out like he wanted to act unfazed, but the twitch in his jaw betrayed him. Two women near the front whispered to each other. "Did he really just fire her for helping?" "Looks that way. My daughter's going to hear about this tonight." Another customer, the guy in the baseball cap, leaned over toward his group. "Bet you this is on Facebook already." Calvin caught Alyssa's worried glance and gave her a small, reassuring nod. "You're not alone in this anymore," she sighed, collapsing into the booth across from him. "It just feels like I lost everything in 5 minutes." He shook his head. "No, you didn't. You stood up without even realizing it, and sometimes standing up costs you something at first. But the payoff?" He tapped the table lightly with his finger. "That comes later." Alyssa looked at him, searching his face. "You really believe that?" "I've seen it," Calvin said simply. His gaze drifted past her, out the window toward the parking lot. Payoff's already pulling in. She turned in her seat, following his eyes. At first, she didn't see anything unusual. Just a few cars parked along the curb, a delivery van backing out. But then, she spotted it. 2 men in Marine Corps dress blues stepping out of a dark sedan. Their posture was unmistakable. Even from a distance, their presence carried weight. "They're here," Calvin murmured. Alyssa's pulse quickened. "Oh my God!" The men walked with steady strides toward the entrance, their shoes polished to a shine, their eyes sharp and focused. One of them, the taller one with close-cropped black hair, pushed the door open, holding it for the other as though entering enemy territory. The squeak of the hinge sounded different this time, as if announcing their arrival. Customers looked up, and the atmosphere shifted again. A new silence fell over the cafe, not awkward this time, but expectant. Martin glanced toward the door, confusion flashing across his face. He tried to play it cool, but his posture stiffened. He hadn't expected backup to arrive for the waitress he'd just fired. Alyssa sat frozen across from Calvin, watching the Marines step inside. She whispered under her breath, "What's about to happen?" Calvin's lips curved into a thin, knowing smile. "Respect is about to walk through that door and stand beside you." But Martin Kedge still thought he was the one in control, and that mistake was about to cost him more than he ever imagined. The door shut behind them with a soft thud, but their presence echoed louder than Martin Kedge's shouting ever could. 2 Marines in dress blues, shoulders squared, ribbons catching the fluorescent light, scanned the cafe as if taking stock of the terrain. They didn't need to say a word. Their posture alone sent a ripple across the room. The taller Marine, Captain Elias Ramos, was the one Calvin had texted. His face was carved in lines of discipline, the kind you only get from years of service. Beside him stood Corporal Trent Maddox, younger but just as composed, his jaw locked tight as his eyes swept over the scene. Every customer knew instantly, these weren't random men. These were Marines who'd walked through fire and carried themselves like nothing could bend them. Calvin lifted his cane slightly, catching Ramos's eye. Their nod of recognition wasn't just a greeting, it was a language only they shared. Martin, on the other hand, straightened like a man who suddenly realized he was standing on thinner ice than he thought. Still, he forced a smirk and barked, "Can I help you, gentlemen?" Ramos didn't look at him first. He walked to Calvin's booth, clapping a firm hand on his shoulder. "Sarge," Calvin gave a half smile. "Knew you'd come." "Always," Ramos replied. Then his eyes shifted to Alyssa, who looked small and shaken across from Calvin. His tone softened. "You're the one who helped him?" Alyssa blinked, unsure how to respond. Yeah, I just carried his tray," Maddox spoke up for the first time. "And you got fired for that?" His voice wasn't raised, but it carried weight. Customers nearby leaned closer, listening. Martin cut in, laughing awkwardly. "Let's not exaggerate. She wasn't doing her job. I run a business here, and if employees can't stay focused, they're out. That's management. Plain and simple." The words tumbled out faster than he meant them to, and for the first time, his voice cracked. Ramos turned, facing him fully now, his eyes narrowed. "Management is one thing. Disrespect is another. You fired her in front of a room full of people for showing humanity to a veteran? I don't need a lecture from outsiders." Martin snapped, but his voice didn't carry the same authority as before. He glanced around, noticing every phone pointed in his direction. Customers weren't just recording, they were waiting. Calvin leaned his cane against the booth, sitting straighter. "This isn't just about me, Martin. It's about the message you sent. That kindness is a liability. That helping someone in need is grounds for punishment." The room stayed silent, everyone holding their breath. Martin tried again, his voice strained. "Look, I don't have to explain myself. This is my cafe, my rules. And he jabbed a finger toward Alyssa. "Broke them." Ramos stepped closer, his tone measured but firm, like a commander addressing a stubborn subordinate. "No, she lived by the kind of rule this country was built on. You don't leave people behind. You don't turn your back when someone needs a hand. She showed respect, and you punished her for it." A low murmur spread across the cafe again, louder this time. One of the construction workers clapped softly, shaking his head. "Man's right." Maddox crossed his arms, his uniform straining against the motion. "And you want to talk about business? Look around. Every person in here just watched you embarrass yourself, not her. Good luck keeping customers after this." Martin's face twisted. "You think you can walk in here and tell me how to run my place? I don't care if you're Marines or—" "Careful," Ramos warned, his voice dropping low. The cafe seemed to shrink under the sound of it. "We didn't come here to fight you. We came to stand with someone you wronged." Alyssa sat frozen, overwhelmed. She hadn't asked for backup. She hadn't asked for anyone to defend her. But now, here they were, men in uniform standing on either side of her, not because she demanded it, but because they believed it was the right thing to do. Martin puffed his chest, desperate to regain control. "You can stand there all you want, but it doesn't change the fact. She's fired. That's final." Ramos's eyes flicked around the cafe, to the phones recording, to the faces watching. Then he leaned just close enough to Martin that the words landed like hammer blows. "Final? No. What's final is the internet. What's final is the story already leaving this room, and when people see a waitress fired for helping a Marine, they'll remember your name, your face, and your cafe. You want to talk about business? Your business is already gone." Martin's mouth opened, then shut. His hands fidgeted at his sides, searching for a comeback that never came. The older woman at the counter, who hadn't spoken a word yet, lifted her phone higher. "I've got it all. Every word." Alyssa stared at her, then at Calvin, then at the Marines. The weight of what was happening settled over her. This wasn't just about her anymore. This was bigger. Calvin leaned back in his booth, a flicker of satisfaction in his eyes. "Told you you'd regret it, Martin." But what none of them realized yet was that the story wasn't going to stay inside the cafe. It was about to explode far beyond those walls. The Granby Street Cafe had never been so quiet, yet the tension inside pressed against the walls like it might burst through the windows. Every eye was locked on the standoff. Martin Kedge behind his counter, red-faced and twitching, and 3 Marines, 2 in uniform, 1 leaning on his cane, forming a line of quiet resistance that made his authority look paper-thin. Captain Ramos didn't move, didn't raise his voice, but his presence filled the room. "You've embarrassed yourself enough, Kedge. Do the right thing and fix this." Martin scoffed, though his laugh came out jagged. "Fix this? I don't owe her anything. She worked for me. She broke my rules. She's gone. End of story." Phones lifted higher, some customers whispering to each other. A teenage boy near the door whispered, "Dude, this is insane. It's already on TikTok." Alyssa shifted uncomfortably, the weight of being at the center of the storm pressing harder with every passing second. She hadn't asked for a rescue squad, but here they were, refusing to let her stand alone. Calvin gripped his cane and pushed himself up, his voice carrying the grit of someone who had spoken commands in battle. "You want to talk about rules, Martin? Here's one. You don't punish someone for compassion. You don't humiliate a person for helping someone who needed it. That's not management. That's cowardice." The words landed heavy. A man at the counter muttered, "Amen to that." Another clapped once, sharp, as if to punctuate the moment. Martin slammed his palm on the counter. "This is my cafe, and I'll run it how I see fit. You don't like it. You can all get out." The threat rang hollow. No one moved. Not a single customer budged. If anything, people leaned in closer, eager to see what would happen next. Corporal Maddox stepped forward, his voice calm but firm. "With respect, sir, no one's leaving. We're standing right here until this is made right." Martin's eyes darted nervously between the Marines and the sea of cameras pointing at him. For the first time, doubt cracked through his bluster. Alyssa finally found her voice, though it shook as it left her lips. "Martin, I gave this place 6 years of my life. 6 years of opening shifts, double shifts, missing holidays. All I did was help someone. And you made me feel like garbage for it." Her words struck deeper than anything Calvin or the Marines had said. They weren't barked orders or threats. They were raw, human truth. The cafe broke into murmurs. One woman said aloud, "She's right. I've been coming here for years. She's the reason half of us even keep coming back." Martin's face twisted. He looked at Alyssa, then at the phones, then back at the Marines. You all think you can corner me? You think this is how you get your way? Ramos didn't blink. No, this isn't about getting our way. This is about you realizing you've already lost. For a moment, the two men just stared at each other. Martin breathing heavy, Ramos calm and unshaken. Then a voice from the door cut through the tension. Too late, buddy. It's already live streaming. Thousands are watching. Martin's head whipped toward the teenager who had spoken earlier, holding his phone high, comments flying across the screen. People are tearing you apart right now, the boy added, almost gleeful. A hush fell again. Even Martin couldn't hide the flicker of fear that flashed in his eyes. His kingdom was crumbling right in front of him, not because of the Marines, but because his behavior was no longer contained to 4 cafe walls. The world outside was watching. Calvin tapped his cane once against the floor. It didn't have to be this way. All you had to do was respect the woman who showed kindness. Instead, you made an example out of her. Now you're the example. The words stung. Martin clenched his fists, opening his mouth to lash back, but no sound came. He knew Calvin was right. Ramos leaned in just slightly, his voice quiet but deadly clear. This moment will follow you longer than you think. Choose wisely how it ends. The cafe was silent again, waiting, holding its breath. Even Alyssa, her hands trembling in her lap, leaned forward to see whether her old boss would dig deeper into his pride or finally break. Martin's lips parted, but before he could speak, the door swung open again. More Marines entered, 3 this time, led by a woman in uniform, her gaze as sharp as a blade. The cafe practically vibrated with the shift in power. Every customer gasped. Someone whispered, "Oh my God, they just keep coming." Martin's face drained of color. He stumbled back a step, his mouth opening and closing like he couldn't form words. Alyssa covered her mouth, whispering, "What's happening?" Calvin exhaled slowly, eyes fixed on the growing line of uniforms. "Back up." But if Martin thought the nightmare couldn't get worse, he was about to learn how fast the world outside those walls was catching up to him. The Granby Street Cafe had never seen so many uniforms under its roof. 5 Marines now stood shoulder to shoulder with Alyssa and Calvin, their presence so commanding that even the clatter of dishes in the kitchen had gone silent. The room was packed with tension, phones still raised, whispers darting across booths like sparks waiting to ignite. Martin Kedge, once so loud and arrogant, looked smaller now. His face was pale, his chest rising and falling too quickly, but he still tried to cling to control. "You can't just storm in here and hijack my business. This is harassment." Captain Ramos tilted his head slightly, his calm stare cutting sharper than a shout ever could. "No one's hijacking anything. We're here because you humiliated a woman for doing what was right. People saw it. People are still seeing it." And they were. Outside the cafe windows, headlights began stacking up. Cars slowed as drivers pulled over, some stepping out with their phones raised to capture what had spilled online. Inside, the teenage boy grinned at his screen. "Guys, this feed's blowing up. 20,000 views in 10 minutes. Martin's breath hitched. That's not possible." "It's happening," the boy replied, not bothering to hide his satisfaction. The front door creaked again, this time admitting not Marines but strangers. Locals who had seen the live stream and rushed over. A woman in scrubs, clearly coming straight from a hospital shift, slipped inside. "Is it true?" she asked, her voice carrying through the quiet. "He fired her for helping a Marine?" Every customer's eyes snapped to Martin. The accusation, once confined to whispers, was now out loud. Undeniable. Martin stammered, "You people don't understand." But he was cut off by another voice. A middle-aged man with a baseball cap and a camera crew behind him shouted, "Channel 13 News! We're live outside! You want to explain yourself on air?" Martin froze, deer in the headlights. He had spent years barking at waitresses and baristas, confident no one beyond these 4 walls would care. Now the walls were dissolving. The world was walking in. Alyssa sat rigid in her booth, overwhelmed. "This can't be real," she whispered to Calvin. Calvin leaned toward her, steady, unshaken. "It's real. And it's justice. You didn't ask for this, but you earned it." The Marines beside them didn't speak. but their silent stance said more than words could. They weren't here to fight. They were here to bear witness. The crowd outside thickened, their voices muffled through the glass. A chant started faintly. Respect, respect, respect. It grew louder, more defined, until the rhythm filled the room, rattling the cafe windows. Martin's shoulders sagged under the weight of it. He turned toward Alyssa, his voice strained. You could end this. Tell them you overreacted. Tell them I didn't. Alyssa's lips parted in disbelief. You want me to clean up your mess? Please, Martin hissed, desperation dripping into his tone. Do you know what this will do to me? To my family? Calvin answered before she could. You should have thought about that before you decided a paycheck mattered more than decency. The woman in scrubs raised her phone high, recording every second. Don't you dare try to guilt her now. You made your choice. Martin opened his mouth, but the chants outside grew louder, drowning him out. Respect! 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 Ramos leaned forward, his voice steady and final. You're finished, Kedge. The only question now is whether you walk out with an ounce of dignity or lose it all trying to fight the truth. The news crew's camera light clicked on, washing the counter in bright white. A reporter adjusted his microphone, eyes fixed on Martin. Mr. Kedge, can you tell us why you fired one of your waitresses for helping a disabled veteran? The cafe gasped collectively. Martin stood frozen, exposed under the glare of a lens that would reach more people than he could ever imagine. Alyssa's chest tightened as the reality hit her. She wasn't invisible anymore. Her small act of kindness, the thing she thought no one would ever notice, had become something far larger. Calvin gave her a small nod. Stand tall. The world's watching. And so she did. Her voice trembled at first, but steadied as it went. I don't regret helping him. Not for a second. If kindness is a fireable offense, then maybe the problem isn't with me. The cafe erupted in applause. Outside, the chants doubled in volume, echoing through the night air. Martin, cornered and powerless, lowered his head. He had lost his authority, his pride, and his cafe's future, all in the span of one morning. But Alyssa didn't yet realize that her story wasn't finished. The tide of support about to sweep her way would change her life forever. When the cameras finally shifted away from Martin and the chants outside reached their peak, Alyssa sat in the booth as though her body had been emptied out. Her hands trembled in her lap, her pulse still racing. She had come in that morning to pour coffee and take orders. Now she was the center of a storm she hadn't asked for. Calvin leaned closer, his voice low so only she could hear. You handled yourself with grace. Don't forget that. Alyssa laughed under her breath, though it sounded more like a sob. Grace, I'm unemployed. My rent's due next week. I don't even know how I'm getting home from here. Before Calvin could reply, the woman in scrubs approached, slipping her phone into her pocket. Excuse me, she said softly. I just wanted to tell you, what you did matters. We see enough cruelty every day. What you did was rare. And if you need work, the hospital's hiring patient aides. You'd be great. Alyssa's lips parted. Stunned. I don't even know what to say. Say yes when you're ready. The woman smiled. That's all. Then she moved back toward the door, slipping into the chanting crowd outside. Not long after, one of the construction workers, the same men who had been laughing over breakfast earlier, walked over, pulling a business card from his wallet. My brother owns a diner down in Chesapeake. He'd hire you tomorrow. Just call him. Alyssa took the card, her throat tightening. 2 offers in 10 minutes, both from strangers who'd been watching her humiliation just an hour earlier. Calvin gave a small smile. Told you. Payoff comes later. The Marines gathered near the door now, speaking quietly among themselves, but still watching over her like guards. Their presence alone kept Martin from even thinking about interrupting. A young woman holding a baby on her hip approached next. I know it's not much, but I've got a Facebook group that helps people in tough spots. If you're short on rent, we'll raise it. Alyssa blinked fast, trying to process it. Why would you do that for me? Because you stood up when someone needed help, the woman replied simply. And that deserves to be repaid. Her baby cooed softly, tugging at her shirt, and she moved back into the crowd. Alyssa turned to Calvin, her voice shaking. This doesn't feel real. Why are all these people? Why are they helping me? Calvin rested both hands on his cane, his eyes steady. Because you reminded them who they are. People want to be decent. They just forget sometimes until someone shows them what it looks like. Tears spilled down Alyssa's cheeks now, not from shame, but from the overwhelming wave of support crashing over her. She had been called replaceable an hour ago. Now strangers were treating her like she mattered more than she ever believed. Ramos approached the booth, his tone softer than before. Miss Trenholm, you should know. You're trending nationally. News outlets picked it up already. By tomorrow, half the country will know your name. Her breath caught. That's terrifying. It's also powerful, Ramos said. You didn't just help a Marine carry his breakfast. You stood for kindness when it cost you something. That's a story people need. Martin groaned behind the counter, burying his face in his hands as the cameras kept rolling. His cafe was lost, and he knew it. Alyssa, meanwhile, sat surrounded by possibilities she hadn't imagined an hour earlier. A new job, a community ready to support her, a chance to define herself not by Martin's cruelty, but by her own decency. She looked at Calvin. What do I even do now? He gave her the faintest smile, one that carried the weight of years and battles. You choose. You decide whether today was just the worst day of your life or the first day of something better. Her breath shook as she whispered, something better. Calvin nodded once, then walked toward it. You've got people behind you now. Outside, the chants grew louder still, almost celebratory now. Respect! 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 Alyssa stood slowly, shoulders straighter than before. She clutched the diner card in one hand, the hospital offer in the other, and looked out through the window at the sea of people who had come to stand with her. For the first time that day, she felt tall. But as the crowd roared her name and strangers reached out with offers of support, Alyssa realized the true choice wasn't about work or rent. It was about whether she would let one man's cruelty define her or let this moment reshape her future entirely. When the chanting finally began to soften outside, and the reporters wrapped up their live coverage, the Granby Street Cafe no longer felt like the same place. The walls still stood, the coffee pots still hissed, and the plates still clattered in the kitchen. But the atmosphere was changed forever. What had started as an ordinary morning shift had turned into a turning point, not just for Alyssa, but for everyone who had witnessed it. Alyssa sat back down for a moment, needing to catch her breath. She stared at the business card in her hand, the hospital offer still echoing in her mind, and the roar of the crowd outside vibrating through the glass. It was overwhelming, like standing in the middle of a storm and realizing the wind was blowing in your favor for the first time. Calvin shifted beside her, adjusting his cane. His face was calm, almost proud. You're stronger than you think, he said. She gave a shaky laugh. Strong? I feel like I've been tossed into a hurricane. He leaned closer. Strength isn't about feeling calm while it's happening. Strength is about standing when you're terrified, and you did that. You didn't let him break you. Remember that. Alyssa looked down at her trembling hands, realizing he was right. She hadn't shouted, hadn't begged, hadn't hidden. She had spoken her truth, and for the first time in years, she felt like she was more than just a waitress serving coffee on tired feet. Martin remained hunched behind the counter, ignored by nearly everyone now. Customers whispered as they passed him, their looks cold and condemning. The man who had ruled with an iron fist had been reduced to a background figure in his own cafe, his power gone. Ramos stepped forward, speaking softly but firmly. Miss Trenholm, you've got decisions ahead of you. This isn't just about a job anymore. It's about how you carry this forward. People are looking at you now, not because you asked for it, but because you did something good in a world that desperately needed to see it. Alyssa exhaled, her chest tight with the weight of it all. What if I let them down? Maddox answered without hesitation. You won't. You already did the hardest part. Outside, the chant shifted. Instead of just respect, people began calling her name. Alyssa! Alyssa! It grew louder, voices layering until the sound filled the air like music. She pressed a hand to her face, tears spilling freely now. I don't deserve this. Calvin's voice cut through her doubt. You do. Because kindness matters. Because standing up matters. And sometimes the smallest act can set off a chain reaction that changes lives. You gave people something to believe in today. The Marines exchanged a glance, their silent agreement hanging heavy in the air. They had come to stand by Calvin, but in doing so, they had stood by Alyssa too. And now, she was the one carrying the lesson forward. She rose to her feet slowly, still trembling, but taller somehow. She turned toward the crowd outside, the glass door separating them, and whispered almost to herself. I'll make it count. Calvin smiled faintly, as though satisfied. That's all anyone can ask. As she moved toward the exit, the customers inside clapped, their applause swelling into cheers. Some reached out to touch her shoulder, to thank her, to tell her she had reminded them what decency looked like. She stepped outside, the cool Virginia air rushing over her, greeted by a sea of faces who had come to stand with her. The crowd cheered louder. Reporters angled their microphones. And Alyssa, still overwhelmed, simply lifted her hand in a small wave, acknowledging them not as fans, not as strangers, but as fellow human beings who wanted to believe in something better. Behind her, Martin stayed in the cafe, shrinking into obscurity. He had fired her thinking he had the final word. But the truth was clear now. He had lost his voice entirely. The night carried on, the story spreading further with every post, every clip, every headline. By morning, Alyssa Trenholm's name would be everywhere, a symbol of kindness punished and defended, a reminder that no act of decency is ever wasted. And in the quiet of her own heart, she made a silent vow to never again let anyone convince her that compassion was a weakness. Because compassion had just changed her life. This story isn't just Alyssa's, it's ours. Every day, each of us faces moments where we can look away or step in. What Alyssa showed is that the right choice might cost you something in the moment, but it gives you back something bigger. Dignity, respect, and the knowledge that you stood on the side of what's right. So here's the takeaway. Don't let fear or pride stop you from helping someone who needs it. The smallest action can ripple further than you'll ever see. And if this story moved you, subscribe to the channel. Because the more we share these moments, the more we remind each other of the kind of people we're meant to be.